Welcome to the DuBois session on alimony or spousal maintenance. When I've gone through all these other sessions, I always start by saying that I can't give you legal advice because I'm not your lawyer, and I can't educate you about the laws in every specific state where you may live, so this is not intended to be advice. This program is intended to be an educational program to teach you to issue spot, which means to be able to see what issues might be relevant in your particular case. And this is a situation, alimony and spousal maintenance is one of those things that is wildly different in different states. I mean, I was really surprised when I started doing research to find out exactly how alimony works in different states. So you're really going to have to pay attention to your specific state laws and statutes about alimony or spousal maintenance. So I'm going to go ahead and do the overview, and we're going to talk about the different factors, but there is a very widely divergent way that this is looked at in different states. And so it goes from everything from hardly any alimony to lifetime alimony. So in some states it's called alimony, and in other states it's called spousal maintenance. And this is going to go one of two ways for you. Either there's no alimony or spousal maintenance necessary because you and your husband both make basically about the same amount of money or close enough. Or maybe if you make more money than he does, you're going to have to pay him spousal maintenance or alimony. Or conversely, if he makes more money than you do, he might pay you spousal maintenance or alimony. So for purposes of discussion here, even though some states call this spousal maintenance, I'm just going to go ahead and say alimony because it's the word that most people are the most familiar with. So let's take a look and see what types of factors are involved in making an alimony decision in various states. There are some states where the alimony award is figured out kind of by statute. And what that means is that it's predetermined by the legislature how much alimony will be awarded. And in some states it's a percentage of the income of the higher earning spouse, and sometimes there's actually a dollar amount, maximum amount of alimony that you can get. In some other states, you get alimony only if you've been married a certain number of years. Like there's some states that say no alimony unless you've been married for 10 years. And other states say if alimony is awarded, there can't be an end date for alimony, which basically means it goes on forever. In some states, they give very specific factors that have to be looked at, and in other states, the factors are a little bit more vague. So alimony is different in different states by the length of alimony, by the amount of alimony, by the circumstances under which you qualify for alimony. So what I'm going to tell you is if you are in a situation, any divorce situation, but if you're in a situation where there's not pretty much equality between the money that you make or can make and what your husband makes or can make, then you really need to do your research for your state and find out exactly what your divorce rights are with regard to alimony. And as part of the divorce process, you need to kind of figure that out before filing for divorce. Usually it's a good idea to have some idea of how alimony works in your particular state. So in the states, so there's two times when alimony becomes relevant in your divorce situation. One is you file for divorce, and then there's a period of time between your divorce and when you have your divorce finalized. That can be months or it can be a year or more, depending on your state and legal requirements for the amount of time of separation that has to happen before you can get a final divorce. So there's a temporary period, and in most states, that's if you come up with your budget. If it looks like you are going to, or he is going to need financial help, either one of you, then you can either come to an agreement about, sometimes one of you says, well, I'll pay the mortgage and you pay the car payments, or something along an agreed financial support, which may or may not be alimony. Or one of you says, here's how much alimony I need, and the other one says, okay, I'll pay that for this period of time. But if you can't agree on that, and some people can't, or a lot of people can't, obviously, because you don't like each other and you're into fighting about it, sometimes you end up in a court hearing. And that's, in a lot of states, it's called a temporary orders hearing, and it's a motion. And in other states, it's called, and I am not exactly sure how to pronounce this, pendente lite. And it's spelled Pendente L-I-T-E, and that means pending litigation. So what it basically means is, for this temporary period, there has to be some sort of an order. And see if this pendente lite order, which in other states is called a temporary order. So you're going to have this period of time that you have to figure out how the bills are going to be paid, and that's going to be called your temporary maintenance or alimony. And one thing you need to be aware of is that alimony is usually taxable to the person who's receiving it and tax deductible to the person who's paying it. So when you're trying to figure out during this temporary time period between when you file for divorce and when your divorce is finalized, some people say, well, I don't really want to pay taxes on the money, so maybe the husband or the person paying the alimony is going to make the mortgage payment. And you got to talk to a CPA, because I'm not a CPA and I can't talk to you about tax consequences because it's not my specialty area. But what we're doing is we're issue spotting. What you don't want to do is enter into an agreement with your soon-to-be ex and then find out that you have to pay taxes on that money and you didn't factor that in. On the other hand, if you're the one paying the alimony, you would want to talk to a tax advisor, because you say, I don't want to pay him any alimony, but you find out it's a tax deduction to be able to pay alimony. And so maybe that's not the worst thing in the world in your situation if you do it very with knowledge and with talking to a financial planner who's a CPA. So if you find yourself having to go into court and make an argument for temporary alimony, then what you're going to probably need to do is come to the judge or the commissioner, whoever hears these motions in your jurisdiction, and you have to look online and find out exactly what's required for a motion in your jurisdiction, or you hire a lawyer. But generally speaking, we're talking about issue spotting now. Generally speaking, you'll be required to come into court with proof of what your bills are. So for example, if you're saying, you make $2,500 a month net income, which is your income after all of your taxes are taken out, so they're $3,000 a month, you might be asking for $500 worth of alimony. So proof would be like a copy of a mortgage statement or rent, your lease agreement. It would be copies of your utility bills, or your, the coupon you get for your car payment, or a copy of how much money you typically spend at the grocery store, or what your gas is. And in some jurisdictions where I practice, for example, there are very strict rules. When you come in on a temporary motion hearing, you have to have 6 months of bank statements, 6 months of utility bills, 6 months of statements from brokerage accounts, because the judge or the commissioner wants to see what is your whole financial picture. If you say, I need $500 a month alimony from your husband, and say he makes $3,000 a month and you make $2,500 a month, and it would be a stretch for him to have to pay that to you, and the judge looks and sees you guys have $20,000 sitting in the bank, or you're getting a bonus next month, or there's other aspects to your financial situation, that's something the judge or the commissioner needs to be able to review the entire situation. Because the job of the commissioner for this temporary period of time is to try to maintain the status quo for you financially. So if you're looking for alimony in that temporary period of time, you're going to have to prove what your expenses are. You're probably going to have to sit down and go through the bills and try to figure that out. So that's a temporary period. But what you're probably more concerned about is, okay, after I'm divorced, now what's going to happen? And again, you might be in the position of earning more money, and you might be faced with having to make alimony payments, or you're in a position where your husband earns more money and you're going to ask for alimony payments. So how does that work? Well, like I said, in various states, there's some states where it's pretty cut and dry. There's other states where there's very specific state statutes and case law that talks about how alimony is determined in various states. And then in some states, it's sort of a statute says, here's some factors that the court has to consider when making an alimony award. And that's not to say that you're necessarily going to court, but if you're going into a settlement, then your strongest position in settlement is to say, look, I'll settle this case, but you need to understand that if I go to court, here's what I'm going to be entitled to. And that puts you in a really strong bargaining position. So it's always good to know what a judge would do with a situation like yours. So the judge is going to look, and factors are different in different states, but they look at things like, how long have you been married? That's a factor. Some states look at, if it's a short-term marriage, you don't get very much alimony. If it's mid-term, you get a little more. If it's long-term, you might get a lot more, or for a longer period of time. They're going to look at the age of the parties. So for example, if you're 35 and you've got a long work life ahead of you, You're not going to get lifetime alimony unless you're in a really unusual situation. I just finished up a trial where my client was 57 years old. She had been unemployed. She had a degree that was so far outdated it was not even functional anymore. She had not worked for over 30 years because she'd been home raising children, and her husband is a dentist, and we went to court because he said no alimony. We're still awaiting a decision from the judge on that one, but the judge made it very clear that she's going to be awarding alimony to this woman. Another thing they look at is the educational level of the parties. So for example, if you have a degree in, say you have an MBA, and say your husband never finished his bachelor's degree, but in a couple of years he could get that bachelor's degree finished up, then the judge might say, well, you're going to have to pay for a couple of years until he gets back up on his feet. And the flip side is true. If you're the one who doesn't have the good job, your husband makes a lot of money, then the judge might be more likely to say, you need to get alimony until you can get into the workforce. Another factor is the income of the parties, and that's similar to the education level, but maybe you have no education at all, or maybe your husband has no education, but he makes, almost $100,000 a year or $200,000 a year, and you can earn, 36 as a assistant at the school. In a situation like that, they don't necessarily look at the education, but they'll look at your incomes and say, oh, this lower wage earner needs some help going forward. They'll look at the health of the parties. If one of you has a disability or some chronic illness like arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis is a common one we see, or multiple sclerosis, that limits the ability of someone to earn an income, or some people have mental health problems, and if they're significant enough, the court will take that into consideration when making an alimony award. And then in some states, they actually have part of their statute says the lifestyle of the parties. So if you've been living a certain lifestyle, some states say you're entitled to continue that lifestyle off into the future if the wage earner can afford to support the other party sort of in a similar lifestyle. So that usually happens for people who make a lot of money. Like if some guy's making $300,000 a year, he's going to have to support his wife, or she's going to support her husband in a way that leads to a comfortable lifestyle. It's not just sort of a subsistence level.